Nerds, I am here with Donna Imam. And if you recall, she was actually in the nerd zone probably a couple years ago now, when she was on a panel of candidates who were running for Congress. And I remember a lot about that brief conversation, the Dell background, the engineer's background, and then I, for sure, was super excited and a little disappointed that the first campaign didn't get over the finish line, but very close, came very close. So Donna's back. She's running again, and chances are she'll probably get more votes this time than the first time campaign. So we're going to get into it with her. But before we do that, let's have Andrew warm us up.
Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up. Yo, there's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up. Yo, there's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Donna, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Tom.
It's a pleasure to have you back. And for those who might be kind of hearing about you for the first time, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go into the politics and the campaigning and stuff.
All right. Well, my name is Donna Imam, and I'm a computer engineer here in Austin, Texas. I built my career here in some of the most iconic companies, Freescale, Motorola, Dell, right here in, the tech capital of Texas, also known as the Silicon Hills. And throughout this time, I was engaged in a nonprofit. I'm an active volunteer in my community. And even though, I brought many, many successful products to market, tens of millions of people use products that I championed, around the world. I also was participating in this nonprofit, which is an educational nonprofit that provides free training and education for anybody who wants it. The nonprofit was in a little bit of a fix. They were in debt, thousands of dollars, and nobody wanted to do fundraising. And I had no background, but I said, hey, I'll give it a shot. In about 3 months, we recruited volunteers. We raised tens of thousands of dollars. And we brought that nonprofit and grew it into a 4,000 member nonprofit. I was elected president. We helped thousands of people. But that's when I realized that we need to do more. And that's when I realized that average people like us who are part of the community have to, be part of the solution. And that's why I decided to run for Congress. So that's kind of my background.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the nonprofit sort of lessons learned. As many people on this channel know, I volunteer for Of the People. We're trying to build this platform to surface more kind of non-incumbent candidates. What was that like trying to raise money for your nonprofit, and how did you become so successful at it?
Yeah, a lot of this comes from the beginning of my career. When I started out my career, really very early on, every single assembly worker in my company was laid off. Their jobs were shipped to Mexico. Many of them never worked a day in their life again. They had no job retraining options. And many people are like, well, you're a research and development engineer. Why do you care? And the reason I care is because even though I was a research engineer, whenever they had issues on the manufacturing floor, I would be called to help the manufacturing engineers resolve some of those challenges. And when I was down there, I met many of the assembly workers. They became friends. And the day you wake up and you see the entire parking lot just empty out, of cars and the entire building become like a ghost town, it has a traumatic effect on you. That's what led me to be so focused on education. But not only that, my mom is a was a school teacher. My dad is in academia and was in academia. He's a research agronomist as well. And for my entire life, they have always encouraged me to give back through education. In fact, my very first job in high school was tutoring calculus. And so that's been my focus. And I thought, what better way to help build a education and training nonprofit that provides it completely free. And the way we became successful is very simple. We, went to donors and we basically, pitched them the value proposition, anything that you do with a product, and said, hey, this is what we get in a community when we bring people together and we bring the smartest people that are in the trenches, that are working on cutting edge technologies and processes and solutions. We bring them together and we ask them to give back to their community by teaching. And it's not just asking them to give back by teaching or fundraising, but I try to live that myself in every day. So for example, in the nonprofit, I always made sure that I taught a class as well. And I continue to do that. I've continued to do that throughout my career, mentoring and training others, but also teaching classes about what I know. And that's really what got me energized. And when you live it, you're able to communicate the value proposition a little bit better. It's similar to my campaign. Almost every job in my campaign I have personally done myself, including, cutting turf. So I think it's important for people to be in the trenches and understand what other people go through. And I think that's what made us, really bring a lot of success to this nonprofit.
That's great. And tell me about that first congressional campaign. Like, what caused you to kind of make that leap, and what was that experience like?
Well, as many of your viewers might know, I ran for U.S. Congress in 2020. And so you all know that Texas is heavily gerrymandered, and Austin, Texas is literally sliced up into 6 pieces like a pizza. And it's appended with large rural swaths of land to basically what's called gerrymander. And many of you might have heard this term before. Gerrymandering is a way to ensure that you have maximum control over the legislator in the state and also at the U.S. Congressional level. So I ran in a very deep red state, which towards the end of the decade, we thought we had a chance of flipping because it was very close in 2018. But one of the interesting things that a lot of people don't know is that every single cycle when you have an election, a lot of it is determined by who turns out to vote and what they're motivated by. So even in 2018, when Trump was in office, many Democrats were, of course, wanted to see that change in a significant way. So they came out in a big force in 2018. And of course, they came out in 2020 as well. In fact, when I ran in Texas's 31st district, which is Northwest Austin, all of its suburbs, and goes all the way to Killeen, we were a grassroots campaign, one of the campaigns that raised the least amount of money, yet, get this, we had the highest Democratic voter turnout in the history of the district in the primary. We had the highest Democratic voter turnout in the history of the district in the runoff. And we had the highest voter turnout in the history of the district, period.
Wow.
And then get this, in Williamson County, we were #1 in voter turnout in all of Texas among the top 25 most populated counties. So you don't get to #1 by chance. You get to #1 by working for it. And the way we did it is we took our message to voters at their door to let them know what was really at stake and what we could accomplish if we came out to vote. And what that turned into is my campaign getting more votes than any other Democrat that had ever ran for U.S. Congress in this district. So it can be done, and we demonstrated a lot of success. Now, 2020 was a disappointing year for Texas because overall, we did not have any net gain in seats. We didn't flip any red districts. Even districts where the candidate or the campaign had raised millions of dollars, and there were 10 targeted districts that the DCCC was targeting to help flip or hold in Texas. In terms of performance, our campaign outperformed almost all of them, if not all of them, right? In terms of the money that we raised and the votes that we got out. But nobody was able to actually flip a district because Texas just could not outdo the amount of people that came out to vote for Trump. And so many people, especially those who vote in the general, they come out to vote at the top of the ticket, but they don't know the people down ballot. And that's why down ballot candidates have to work so hard to get their message to voters. Another thing that, a lot of voters are not aware of, and this may be surprising to many of you watching because you're so politically engaged and so plugged in, that a lot of people that vote in a general are confused by state representatives versus U.S. representatives, and then state senators, and so it's and county commissioners and what their roles are. And we would think that a lot of people would know all of this, but it's astounding how many people are unaware of what policies are made at the federal level versus what policies are made at the state level and who has control over them, et cetera, et cetera. And what's more alarming is that majority of the people do not understand what a primary is and are unaware of primary elections, which is where some of the most important decisions get made with respect to representation.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and tell me a little bit about how things are looking for 2022. Where are we in that process?
Yeah, so let's start with 2020. In 2020, we had a dozen people running. 6 people made it to the ballot. I was one of them. I was a first-time candidate, and I was up against elected candidates who had ran county-wide and who had ran district-wide. And there was absolutely no chance that people thought that our campaign would have a chance in winning. Well, we made the runoff. And in Texas, if you don't get more than 50% of the votes, it goes to a runoff. So our campaign went to a runoff election. In that runoff election, we won that with a 13-point lead, double-digit win, even though we were behind when it was the primary election. So we won the Democratic nomination, and we weren't supposed to because I was a first-time candidate that had never ran for office before, right? Now, 2022 is a whole different game. 2022, what
Donna,
happens is...
I'm just showing for the audience here, this was the preliminary primary where I guess there was like 6 of you. And then you and Christine Mann were the top 2. And then there was this runoff with you versus Christine. And you got close to 57%. And then we go to the general, and it was 53-44. Just to kind of give everybody the 2020 story.
Yep, absolutely. And so what happened in 2022 is
By the way, I should say congratulations on getting the nomination as a first-time candidate. That's pretty amazing. And then also coming so close in the general. So I think, kudos to you for that.
I appreciate that, Tom. So 2022 is a whole new game for Texas because Texas got 2 new congressional districts on top of the 36 that they already have. So now they have 38 districts. So the conventional wisdom is if you get 2 new districts and you have a trifecta GOP legislator in Texas, which means the GOP owns the Texas State House, they own the Texas State Senate, and of course, they own the governorship, unfortunately. So the conventional wisdom is if you get 2 new districts, they're going to draw the lines in order to manipulate it and get 2 new GOP districts.
Right.
But lo and behold, back in June of 2021, our campaign looked at the census results and said, you know what, there's a really strong chance that Austin will get a brand new district, and this district will be Democratic leaning. And we anticipated that based on our data analysis. And so back in June 28th, I said, if Austin gets a brand new district, which is Democratic leaning, I plan to run in that district. And so I started my campaign, 6-7 months ago now. And in October, believe it or not, Texas got 2 new districts, and Austin, Texas got a brand new district for the first time in decades. That is strong Democratic leaning, believe it or not. So it's Texas's 37th district. I was redistricted into this district. So I have been living in this district, the brand new Texas's 37th district, for over 15 years.
Yeah.
And I am now on the ballot because of thousands of grassroots donors to our campaign. And this wouldn't be possible, by the way, if we hadn't won the nomination in 2020. So the nomination in 2020 really helped us be so strong and get thousands of contributions before the primary,
Right.
which, remember, in 2020 was so difficult for a first-time candidate that no one knew, right? So, but this is a much tougher race in the sense that it is a Democratic primary, and because it's strong Democratic leaning,
Right.
this primary will decide the representation for Austin.
Yeah,
So-
you win the primary, you pretty much are going to win the seat.
That is highly likely. That's correct.
Yeah. So tell
So
me
it's
about,
a very difficult race, but
Yeah.
I think we have a really good shot because I think our message is on point. And of course, we are trying to do the work and get our message to voters, but that is extremely difficult and it's extremely expensive. So even though we do have a much better, stronger position in the primary than the last primary, being a first-time candidate, we still need help. We're trying to get our message to voters, but there's an expense associated with that, obviously. So of course, if you would like to support us, we would love your support in that regards.
100%. So when's the primary?
So the primary early voting starts on Valentine's Day, February 14th, right?
Wow, it's right around the corner.
So, but here's the deal, right? What is more romantic than voting your conscience and voting for somebody who will champion single-payer healthcare for all and debt-free education, right? So I hope if you're listening and you're in Austin, Texas, you will check out our campaign, go out and vote. And some people will actually be getting mail-in ballots in their mail next week. So even if you're not in Austin and you know someone in Austin, friends, family, coworkers, grandparents, let them know that we're running in this race and we would love to have their support and their vote.
Love it. So tell me a little bit about your value proposition to this new district's Democratic-leaning voters. Why would a registered Democrat that's going to participate in the primary, why should they choose you versus, I'm guessing, other kind of credible candidates that will be running as well?
Absolutely. This is a wonderful question. And let me start by saying that our Congress needs expertise in science and technology, right? And I plan to use my 18 plus year career in engineering to deliver on solutions for the American people. I am very focused on economic solutions, and my platform is very simple. I want to bring a federal solutions to homelessness. We have over 3,000 people in Austin, Texas that are homeless, and we see tent cities under every bridge all through the last several years. You could not drive around Austin without seeing major tent cities under every single overpass. And I have a federal solution and a proposal for that. Number two, Texas is the number one state in the entire country with the most number of people with no health insurance and the most number of people with no health care. And I bring up the health care part because it's important for people to realize that health insurance is not necessarily health care. And so Texas also is number one in rural hospital closures. So I'm a huge advocate, those of you who know me, for single payer Medicare for all. But what I realized is this, that we have a huge problem when it comes to the availability and the number of primary care physicians and physicians as a whole in the United States. So right now in our country, we have over 90,000 physicians that were trained and educated outside the United States. So my proposal does two things. One, it accelerates Medicare for all. It lowers the cost of healthcare drastically, but most importantly, it scales the healthcare infrastructure by putting more physicians and primary care physicians and nurses into the system to provide coverage for everybody. Right now in Texas, for example, you can get ACA if you have a certain income. If you're under a certain income, by the way, you can't even get ACA. You can't even get any kind of federal support because Texas is one of the few states that refuse to expand Medicaid.
Yeah.
Yes, they have that gap, right? So even if you have health care through ACA in Texas, you have this challenge of a huge deductible. Majority, if you go into healthcare.gov and you signed up, a week ago, because January 15 was the last date, you'll find that majority of the plans require you to have a $7,000 to $8,000 deductible before you can go see a doctor for any reason. My solution enhances Medicare for All to solve that. And last but not the least is education. And I talked about education in a big way. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about. I believe that education and training is the reason why we as a country are on the cutting edge of technology and why we are so successful. And by basically limiting our kids by loading them up with mortgage size loans, student loans, just so they can get basic education training, go to community college, we are doing a huge disservice to our country. And this is a national security issue for us if we don't have well-educated people in every facet. We also see this with respect to manufacturing, by the way. We talk about inflation. A lot of this is driven by the fact that we have supply chain issues. We have supply chain issues because we're unable to do a lot of this manufacturing, and we've lost a lot of the skill set to do manufacturing in the United States. Now, here's the interesting thing. Many manufacturing jobs are actually coming back to the United States, but they're different because you need some sort of programming skills. You need to be able to assist with equipment that's highly technical in nature. And those equipment require you to have some classes in community college, like Austin Community College, ACC, is one of the most amazing community college networks. They have a course where you come out as a quality production person, and you just need 6 or 7 classes, right? But these are community college classes that have a cost associated with them. So remember, in the Build Back Better plan, we had 2-year free community college. Guess what? Even with a majority in Congress, yes, I know it's a 3-vote majority, a tuition-free community college in the Build Back Better was gutted in the House before it even made it to the Senate. And why is this a problem? This is a problem precisely because of this. The cost of education with technology should be going down, not the other way around. Yet, the cost of education has gone up 3,000% in the last several decades. And there's no explanation for this, because think about it this way. University professors, community college teachers, they're not making double, triple their salary. In fact, many of them make less than 6 figures. They make 5-figure salaries. They're not being paid millions and millions of dollars, right? We're not bulldozing down entire college campuses and rebuilding them every year. So why is it that the cost of education has gone 3,000% overall, while our salaries haven't gone up? It's not like calculus and physics has changed the fundamentals. And sure, there's a lot of innovation, I get that, but it still doesn't explain this cost. And I'll give you another example. Purdue University, where I went for my master's degree in electrical and computer engineering, has been able to lower the cost of education year over year and keep the cost of tuition down. Georgia Tech offers a computer science degree for less than several $1,000, a master's in computer science degree. So if certain institutions are able to pull this off, we should be focused on lowering the cost of education and driving the cost of education down to zero, and being able to offer that to anybody, whether it's at a community college level, whether it is graduate school, bachelor's degree, or even if it's a trade, or even if it's a certification, let's say, for example, right? It really opens up the opportunities for your career and boost your paycheck. So that is one of my biggest focuses. And I want to tie up your question with this answer. If I get to Congress, I believe that we need people in the House that will negotiate bills with the Senate that actually pass. Because it doesn't make any sense just to pass these bills in the House and say, hey, we did it. It's Kristen Sinema's fault and it's Manchin's fault. We have to strategically figure out how we can get solutions for the American people passed. I have stood in front of vice presidents of major Fortune 500 companies and had to argue why my product should be funded and why it should go to market. And we need that kind of skill set in Congress to drive solutions and get them done for the American people. And I will work to deliver solutions instead of just saying, hey, we tried, we couldn't get it done.
Well, I have some follow-up questions for you, Donna, and I'll also ask for the folks watching on the live stream, if you want, feel free to put some questions in the chat. So we're going to get to that. Before we do that, I do want to give a quick shout out to thanking some of the supporters of the Nerds for Humanity channel that help us keep this this content production running. So let me just do a quick shout out to some of our members, and then we'll get back to the rest of the interview. So first, we want to thank Soldier One, who is our biggest supporter, the executive vice president, speaking of vice presidents, of the Nerds channel. Then we have our VPs, and they are Kristen Slevin, Bike, and our newest VP, Stephen Jones. And then at the hardcore level, we have Mike, Gene, David, DK, Jekalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Byram, Mona, Susan, Vaughn, Yang, Tony, Robert, Dean, Statner, Galessa, Jay Perrin, AH, Jay Bryan, Vivian, Dana, Yoda, Jason, and Parth. And then at our entry level, we have our verified nerds who are, in order of time as a member, Lisa Sugar, Albert Brandon, Peter, Arez, Your Mom and Sophia, Jadwiga, Mike, Doris, Emerald, Lori, Ben, Roger, Lisa, Rasta, Elizabeth, James, Emma, Hui, Ira, Shoni, Philip, Jameson, Dr. William, Karen, Monica, Ardent, Zemery, Mai, David, Brittany, Alex, Alexandra, Wana, Warren, Lucky, Kevin, Finney, and H3 Simp. And our newest members overall are Stephen Jones, Finney Helps, and H3 Simp. So thanks to all who make this channel possible. Donna, I want to follow up with you about you've got to be able to get stuff done. It sounds very pragmatic and very, like what I would expect in a business. Let's kind of get it done and find a consensus here. How do you navigate, the party debates within the Democratic Party? And you talk to one person and they'll say, oh, the party is not progressive enough, we need to go farther. And then you talk to someone else and they say, well, we got to get things done, we got to find some common ground. How do you navigate that? Because it seems like you have progressive aspirations, but you're kind of applying maybe a pragmatic progressive or something like that. How do you think about navigating that territory?
Yeah, I mean, this is a most important question, right? Because this is a very difficult thing, bringing together your entire caucus to get things done. And I believe the way to do it is to take the argument to the American people. And this is how we, did this in the primary. How did we win a primary that we weren't supposed to win? Because we took our message to the voters. And so how do we do that? One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that when you are elected to Congress people have a budget where they can communicate with their constituents completely free. Completely free meaning the American citizens pay for it, basically. Mm-hmm. So they have the ability to send what's called franked mail. I don't know if you've heard of that term before, but they can send a letter multiple times to all of their constituents at no cost to them. They can communicate what are the good things about these policies. And it is important that once we elect people to Congress, that we remind them that they have a responsibility and an obligation to their constituents to educate them in what is good for our country. So the way you build consensus is you have to take your message to the American people, and you have to find strategic and unique ways to do it, because we know that the mainstream media they have a very special focus, which is making money for their channels, right? It's very important, right? So we have to bring them on board. We have to convince them. And if we can't, we have to find other ways to communicate to the American people. Right now, think about it this way. How many Congress people that are elected are actually communicating with their constituents, educating them about how we lower the cost of education and healthcare, right? We have to inspire them to do that. That's number one. Number two, when I won last cycle, I had a lot of people who were in Congress that called me to congratulate me for winning the nomination, right? And interestingly enough, I had some really deep conversations with some of the Congress members, Democratic Congress members. And one of them told me, Donna, I really wish you would get elected because you could really help me make some of these cases. It's very difficult to convince my own coworkers, my own, party about some of the things we need to do. And I said, absolutely. If I get elected, I'd love to. I think we need to bring the data to the American people, and we need to do it over and over and over again and not let up. The data has to be conclusive. It has to make sense. It has to be logical, and it has to be financially intact. So what I like to say when people ask me, Donna, why are you running for office? One of the things I like to say is, I'm bringing the financial case for what we Democrats believe is the morally right thing to do. And I think this is an important thing to answer the American people, because they have been told over and over again that somehow we can't get these things done. And we have to show them a specific plan on how it can be done, how it will be paid for, and it needs to be done in a respectful manner instead of saying you're wrong. We have to show them why this is good for the American people and for our country. And that's how I hope to build consensus. I've been very successful in building consensus inside corporations where you have to compete to bring your product out, because you have multiple product managers and you have to compete for engineering resources, finance resources, procurement resources, right? So you have to make the case to the vice president of product why your product is the right product for the company to pursue and bring to market. We have to take these sort of approaches in Congress to ensure that our policies that are good for the American people win. And we do that by taking our message to the American people. Tom, I won't lie to you. This is a very difficult job, but I refuse to give up, because we need to get these things done for the American people. As I said, people in Texas are suffering. We're gerrymandered to the max. We don't have health care. Our reproductive rights have been taken away. And we can't just say, hey, it's a lost cause, because guess what? In the early 90s, Democrats had a trifecta in Texas. They had the governorship, they had the House, and they had the Senate, Texas State Senate. So can we do it? Absolutely. And I intend to work for it, because I believe that if you keep at it, you're going to accomplish it.
Absolutely. Well, kudos to you, and I share your optimism. Let me ask you this, though. One of the things that I've observed is many voters, maybe it's a combination of the polarization we see, or the way social media works. They're very motivated by calling out hypocrisy on the other side, and demonizing the other party. And it's not a kind of, let's figure out the return on investment, let's figure out the details of this plan. That doesn't seem to resonate with a lot of voters. Your approach, it sounds very practical, pragmatic, results driven, data driven, which people are, for this channel, I think will appreciate that. I wonder, how does that line up with the typical primary voter, who might be more energized by, different kind of more emotional pleas? How will you navigate that? Clearly you did it last time, but how will you do it this time? Because it feels like people are even more emotional now than they might have even been 2 years ago.
No, you're absolutely right. Look, the job isn't easy. I recognize that. I'm in a very uphill battle to win this Democratic nomination, and it's not a simple task, absolutely. But I believe this. I believe that if you respect the voter, if you stop insulting their intelligence, and if you can speak to them in a way that connects to their everyday life. Look, We have people in Texas that are struggling today, juggling between literally buying groceries, medicine, and being able to pay their real estate taxes. These are people that have worked their entire lives, full-time jobs, okay? School teachers, social workers, healthcare workers. They have purchased a home, a modest home, a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom home with a 1-car garage in Austin, Texas. Today, they're being driven out because on a fixed income, they can't afford it. When you bring solutions that addresses their pain points that they're facing every single day, you have their attention. They are listening to you. And I believe primary voters are very plugged in. They are much more focused on who they want their representative to be, because remember, majority of the people don't pay attention to primaries. So I do believe they read. I do believe they take into consideration. And of course, this is just anecdotal, but I'll tell you a story. I canvass myself. I go door to door and I talk to voters, and we did a lot of this in 2019 and early 2020 prior to the pandemic. And then of course we got on the phone. But one of the things that I enjoy the most is really just listening to people at their door. So I go to this door in one of the neighborhoods close to me, and I knock on the door, and the person who comes says, I ask them for the person who's the voter, and she's like, "Oh yeah, you're Donna. I voted for you." And I said, "Oh really?" She said, "Let me go get my partner." And I said, "Wait, before you go get him, can you tell me why you voted for me?" And she said, "Well, I read your positions on League of Women Voters. I compared you to the other candidates, and you're definitely the best candidate by far. So it's very clear to me." So even though this is just one data point, I do believe that primary voters are paying attention. They are looking at policy much more than general voters. I believe general voters may be more, red, blue driven, but I think primary voters do pay attention. But we do need more younger people to pay attention to primaries, because I think the majority of voters overwhelmingly tend to be older in a primary. Of course, they have more time to pay attention to what's going on. One of the interesting things about younger voters is, they're not watching network TV. They often don't watch local news. The data says people under 40 don't watch network news. So they often don't know that there's a primary election going on. And that is why it is so important for us to reach the voter. And that's why it's so expensive. That is why, by the way, challengers or first-time people to Congress find it so difficult to win, especially grassroots candidates who don't have a big PAC behind them or who don't have the DCCC pushing them. It's so difficult for us to win because we just can't raise enough money to get our message to voters. The message is very popular, but if you don't get it to voters, then no one's heard you. They don't have the option to vote for you.
Well, that actually leads to a question from Soldier One, which is, what do you need to win this time? Seems like you came really close last time. What can people do to help?
So there's 3 things you can do. Number 1, absolutely, if you know anybody in Austin, please call them. Tell them that they've been redistricted, that Donna Imam is running, to check out their campaign and come out and vote no matter what it takes. And then ask them to tell 10 people, not through social media, like text them, call them. That is the most important thing anybody can do right now that's watching. That's number 1. Number 2, if you are able to donate anything at all, even $1, $5, $50, $100, I am maximizing every single dollar on how we use it to reach voters. We are stretching it to ensure that we get our message to voters. If you can donate anything at all, it would be so appreciated right now. We literally have 3-4 weeks, less than 4 weeks to the early voting, and your money would really be spent wisely. If we win this primary, we pretty much win this race. So we need your help now. So if you can donate, I would really, really be grateful. And number 3, is if you can help us volunteer. If you're here and you can go door to door and help us get the message out, please contact our campaign. We'd love your help. in any way, shape, or form that you can volunteer. Even like if you're good at graphics, maybe you can help us create some graphics, for example. But we're also hiring for field in our campaign. So if you're here in Austin, Texas, and would like to work for our campaign, let us know.
And are you guys doing phone banking as well, or focusing on the door-to-door?
We're absolutely doing phone banking as well. We're doing phone banking, we're doing text banking, but here's the thing. Nothing works better than getting the message to the door. This is the most effective way to get out the vote, because you not only inspire one voter, they get inspired to tell their neighbors and their friends and their social circle, their clubs about it. And I'm not talking about Democratic clubs. I'm just talking about hobbyist clubs and other places. We have to get outside of the basic political infrastructure, because guess what? 99.xxx% of voters, those voters are not in Democratic clubs. They are not watching politics on TV all day long, right? We have to reach them. That's how we win.
Absolutely. And shout out to Paul Wu, who just donated to your campaign after watching this conversation. So hopefully
thank you so much, Paul. I'm so grateful. Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it.
And Donna, what do you think is the highest, speaking of ROI, what's the best use of additional funds? Is it deploying more field staff to just cover as many doors as possible?
It's definitely the most effective, but to be truthful with you, you need to do everything. Voters have to feel like, so here's a statistic for you. In order to reach a voter and get them out to vote in the primary, you have to hit them 6 times.
Yeah.
So they need that text message, they need that voicemail, they need that face-to-face, and they need also to see you on TV sometimes, which is very expensive. Like someone like me, we can't afford TV ads, literally, right?
Yeah.
Because we can't run enough of them. So let's say we spend a little bit of money on TV, but it's not enough to reach voters. So you need TV, you need digital, you need email. You have to hit voters in many different ways. We are trying to do that. We're trying to be very effective in how we surround voters with our message. We truly believe this, Tom. If we can get my message, our campaign's message to voters, we will win. The challenge is, have they heard, our message? And so if you love this interview, please share it. Ask someone to watch it and share it with somebody in Austin. Like I said, the number one thing you can do is tell people in Austin to come out and vote for our campaign, because guess what? Votes win elections.
Yeah, that's just the math, right? So before we wrap up, Donna, I did want to get your quick take on some things in the news, and just like imagine if you were in Congress, how would you think about a particular issue, and what perspective would you bring to it? So like off the top of my head, just based on listening to the morning NPR news summary, definitely sounds like things in Ukraine and Russia are kind of heating up. What do you think should be America's perspective on that? I've heard some people argue, hey, this is we can't stand by and watch other countries invade other countries. And then other people say, like, we have our own problems. Like, we need to just focus on what's going on inside our borders. What's your take?
Well, I'll be frank with you. I am staunchly anti-war. I believe that war solves nothing, and I believe in the data, and I'll give you the data. When the Biden administration was asked on point, what happened in Afghanistan, and why did that withdrawal go badly? One of the things that the Biden administration's top spokesperson said was, look, we have many levers, and those are economic levers. And we have the opportunity to use those economic levers to negotiate with the Taliban. So let's go back to that. If we have economic levers, and by the way, when I say economic levers, I don't mean sanctions necessarily. People will say, oh, Donna, economic levers, so you mean sanctions? No. I mean economic incentives. We need to use every single diplomatic effort that we have at our disposal, every single diplomatic resource, and we need to use economic incentives to ensure that there's peace across this world. As a leader in this world, we need to be focused on solving problems diplomatically. I vehemently oppose any kind of war, and I believe that these problems can be solved and we need to explore them. I think the American people need to know what all our options are. And the truth is, we have options. And it was said publicly on TV, and you can watch the clip. It was, on one of the Sunday morning shows. I believe that we should use our economic levers, always use the carrot before the stick, because that is what's going to be most effective. And I've seen that happen in real life. In any kind of in business, by the way, you get results, right, by putting in incentives. And that's what I would definitely focus on.
All right. I also noticed that Vaughn, one of the Nerds for Humanity members, just donated to your campaign. So thanks, Vaughn, for doing that.
Thank you, Vaughn.
Yeah, thanks, Vaughn. And then also Laura says that she's in your district. How can she get your message out locally? I would imagine she should. Is there a volunteer kind of contact on your website, or how do people in the district kind of engage and join the team?
Laura, thank you so much. I love that you're in my district. You know what we would love is to give you a list of doors to go to and put our literature on their doors right in your neighborhood. So if you contact our campaign, let us know which neighborhood you live in, and we'll give you, a bunch of addresses, and you can go out for an evening stroll and put those flyers on people's doors. So you get a little bit of exercise. Maybe you're walking your dog or something. It would be really amazing if you could help us out.
Wonderful. Maybe last current events question for you, Donna. Let's talk about this Build Back Better bill, and doesn't look like it will get through, and there's talk of breaking it up into pieces. Are you supportive of that? I've heard some people say, no, we should double down and hold the opponent's feet to the fire, and other people saying, like, let's take half a loaf if we can get it. How do you stand?
Well, I think the negotiation around Build Back Better was, could have been done in a way that was more effective. I believe in getting things done, like I said. So let me tell you how I would have done it. When the BIF, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, came to the House, guess what? House Democrats did not do anything to negotiate the contents of that bill. So they passed it with absolutely nothing to negotiate in part of it, right? They kind of gave that away as is. It is really important for Congress people to use their leverage to do things that are good for the American people. Now, I'm not saying the infrastructure bill as a whole is not good for the United States. It is. But there are lots of things in there that are where it privatizes public infrastructure, which are actually not good for the American people, and these could have been negotiated. Now, why do I bring that up? Because that could have been used as a way to get Build Back Better better negotiated and collaborated with Senate to get some things, from the Senate in return for something from the House. You see what I'm trying to see where I'm going at with this? This is negotiation 101, right? So in Build Back Better, I think one of the biggest challenges is that we're basically gutting it in the House, and we're not doing what it takes to pass it in the Senate. And let me give you an example. If you're an elected congressperson in the United States Congress, you have a lot of focus and you have a lot of ability to get in front of senators. You are right there in Congress, right? Imagine if you're a voter. Imagine how difficult it would be to get a meeting with your senator. It's difficult, right? But if you are an elected person in the House, you should be able to get a meeting and you should be able to negotiate what is most important for the American people. I think it's also important for Democrats to come out and really talk about these policies. How are they going to get them passed? Now, is breaking them down good? Is trying to renegotiate good? it's difficult to say unless you're in the House and actually having these meetings day to day. But what I'm for is, yes, getting something passed is better than nothing at this point, definitely. But I am very dismayed by the fact that 2-year tuition-free community college was gutted. The fact that we couldn't get dental coverage, right? For people who are 65 plus. This should be for everybody. By the way, if you have dental insurance, guess what? Dental insurance barely scratches the surface of a root canal or a crown or an implant. And so if you're 65 and older, even with dental insurance, they can cost thousands of dollars. We're talking really, really detrimental to your everyday quality of life. And these are things that the Congress people have to get in front of their constituents. They have to hold town halls. They have to send franked email. They have to educate their constituents to ensure that we put pressure to force these through. And here's the second part of it. I understand we have Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin against Build Back Better. But what is Congress doing to convince some of the moderate Republicans also? Republican members, GOP members, what is Congress doing to motivate Republican voters to say, because guess what? Republican voters have the same challenge. They have the same healthcare costs that we do. We need to make sure that they also are part of this and hold their feet to the fire. We have to absolutely reach across the aisle, not to compromise with them, but to convince them, to influence them, to negotiate with them, to come and vote for things that are good for the American people. And we absolutely have to get out of this politicization of every single thing, labeling every single thing. We got to focus on solutions. That's what I intend to do. And I believe we have to build consensus no matter what. That is our job. Imagine if you were hired for a company at $174,000 per year. And year after year after year, decade after decade, you are not delivering on what they hired you to do. Would they keep you around?
Probably not. Yeah. And by the way, Dana just donated. She's also a Nerds member. So, Dana, thanks for supporting Donna's campaign.
Thank you so much, Dana.
And last thing I'll show is for those of you who like what you're hearing from Donna, please also take a minute to go to ofthepeople.us, and you can find Donna's campaign. I think the easiest way is you can Control F until we add in the search capability, or you can sort by zip code. I think like Austin might be 73301 or something like that. And then you can see Donna's campaign here, and you can vote to approve her. And then the more approval votes she gets, then she kind of moves up on this trending popular list. And then we give more exposure to those candidates and help spread the word on social media. So that's another way you can help. And then on Donna's OTP page, there's a link to her campaign website for volunteers. There's a link to her social media to follow her on Twitter. And we've also embedded your campaign video in there and bio. So hopefully that's useful to people. And really appreciate you, Donna, for coming back on the show. I don't want to jinx you, but it seems like you've got a really good shot. And if anybody's interested in supporting you, it's pretty much like the next few weeks is what it's going to come down to.
Absolutely.
The primary winner will likely win the general, with the way that the district is composed. So, and we know Donna came really close. I mean, she won the primary in the last district. So if we can get you in there, I think pragmatism and data will win over. Oh, I have to ask you, I forgot. People were asking in the chat, what is your position or perspective or opinion on universal basic income?
100%. I support UBI. It's on my website. It's something that I'm very passionate about. My funding sources for UBI would be a little bit different than what maybe has been floated in the last 2 years. The way I would fund it would be different, but I'm absolutely supportive of it. And here's why I'll tell you why I support it. I believe that the government's job is to remove obstacles from in front of their residents so that we can unleash the power of the American people. That's their job, to take away all the things that are in front of us that are preventing us from living up to our greatest potential. I believe that today we have the Picassos, we have some of the smartest people, unfortunately, maybe in jobs like flipping burgers or whatever, that are keeping them back from the potential that we can realize as a human race. And we need to unleash that, and we can do that by taking away economic challenges that people have. They're completely ridiculous. We don't need them. And mathematically, I can show you that we have more resources than we absolutely need for every single person in our country. So absolutely, I'm all for it.
Love it. As Vaughn says, bam, unleashing the power of the people. So Donna Imam running for Congress in Austin, Texas, the 37th district. Is that right?
That's right.
And primaries coming up in a few weeks. Ballots are already some people might be getting in the mail soon. If you know someone in Austin, please share this video with them. Let them know that you think Donna's a great candidate. And if you can volunteer, please go to Donna's campaign website. If you can donate, it sounds like she'll put it to use. And hopefully we'll be interviewing nominee Donna Imam in a month or two. But fingers crossed, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate you having me and taking the time to do a long form interview and introducing me to your viewers.
I love it. With that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.